Hi, I know I'm just a cat, but I believe in kindness. If you click subscribe under this video, you'll make my day.
They say the little things don't matter until they do. And for me, it started with a sentence I'll never forget. I was sitting at the chipped kitchen table, the same one where we had our Sunday pancakes and forced birthday dinners, and I asked my parents if they could co-sign on my student loan application. I had the papers ready, pen in hand, heart thudding in my chest because I knew this wasn't going to go the way I hoped. My mom looked at my dad, then back at me with that tight smile she wore when she was about to let me down gently, like she'd already rehearsed this moment. She said, "Honey, it's not that we don't believe in you. It's just, student debt is serious, and you don't really know where life will take you yet. We just don't want you to make a mistake that'll follow you forever." And then, like they were doing me some kind of favor, my dad added, "You're smart. You'll figure something else out. You always do." I didn't cry. I nodded, swallowed the lump in my throat, and left the papers on the table as I walked out. I didn't even bother taking them with me because I already knew that no wasn't a soft one. It was permanent, final, like cement hardening around your ankles. I went to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at my backpack, knowing I'd have to make this work another way. But what made the blood rush to my ears and my skin crawl wasn't just the no, it was what happened exactly 6 days later. Travis came home with a brand new black pickup truck, shiny, lifted, with rims so wide they looked cartoonish. I didn't even have to ask who co-signed for it. He came stomping through the front door, talking too loud as usual, saying, "Damn thing's got heated seats and a touchscreen. Dad hooked it up." And Mom, she was standing there laughing like he just came home with a medal. "He has a plan," she said when she caught me staring. Like that explained everything. "He's gonna start that landscaping business with Kyle. You know, be his own boss, finally do something with his hands. It's good for him to start now while he's motivated." I remember feeling this strange kind of quiet rage. Not the loud screaming kind that shakes the house, but the cold surgical kind. The kind that doesn't make you cry or break something. It just sits there, low in your gut, tightening slowly like a rope pulling on itself. Because here's what they didn't know. I had a plan too. It didn't have shiny rims or a logo or a buddy named Kyle, but it was solid. I had applied for 23 scholarships during my senior year, stayed up nights crafting essays and digging through websites. I got rejected by 19 of them, waitlisted by 3, and accepted by 1, just 1. But it was full ride. Room, board, tuition, the whole damn thing. I hadn't told them about it yet because, deep down, I think I wanted to give them the chance to show me they believed in me without needing the safety net. I wanted to see if they'd bet on me like they bet on him. But they didn't. And once the truck showed up, I realized they never would. So I said nothing. I didn't tell them I was leaving in 3 weeks. I let them keep thinking I was figuring something out. I let them assume I'd be stuck here working that miserable hostess job at the steakhouse down the road while Travis played entrepreneur with their money. I let them plan barbecues and family dinners and fake concern about my lack of direction. Like I hadn't been quietly building my escape the entire time. You ever wonder how many people sit in silence around their own dinner table, biting their tongue while someone else gets handed everything they begged for? You ever feel like you're screaming underwater, but no one notices because you've gotten so good at smiling with your mouth shut? I packed my bags while they were out on a weekend trip, one of those spontaneous family getaways they used to plan last minute, never thinking to invite me unless I asked. I folded everything neatly, zipped up the suitcase, and left the closet half empty. I didn't leave a note. I didn't owe them a speech. I got in the bus that Monday morning before dawn, my scholarship packet in one hand and my future in the other. And as the town I'd grown up in shrank behind me, I didn't look back once, not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much for too long, and it had gotten me nowhere. And here's the thing. Revenge doesn't always come with fireworks or screaming matches or doors slammed off their hinges. Sometimes it's just silence, distance, success. Sometimes the coldest revenge is disappearing before they even notice you're gone. And I was just getting started. There's a strange kind of freedom that comes with being forgotten. A quiet clarity that settles in your bones when you realize that no one is waiting on you to succeed or fail. Because in their minds, you've already done both without them ever having paid real attention. The first few weeks of college felt like that. Like I was existing in a vacuum, detached from everything I used to think mattered, floating just above the surface of a life I had desperately tried to belong to. The campus was unfamiliar, sprawling, and loud with voices I didn't recognize and never had to explain myself to. And for the first time in my life, that anonymity felt like a gift I hadn't known I needed. I wasn't someone's sister or someone's daughter here. I was just Emma, a name on a class roster, a student ID number, a blank slate with something to prove, not to anyone back home, but to myself. The scholarship wasn't just money, it was structure, it was expectation, it was pressure tied up in opportunity, and it kept me moving even when I thought I might collapse under the weight of it all. I worked 2 jobs, one in the library shelving books until midnight, and another in the student center cafe, burning my fingers on cheap espresso machines and pretending not to care when people barked their orders without eye contact. I didn't have the luxury of skipping class or taking spontaneous weekend trips to the lake like the girls down the hall did. I didn't party. I didn't waste time on people who said things like, "I don't even know what my major is, I'm just here to figure it out," because I didn't have time to figure it out. I was on a clock. Every semester, every test, every paper was a step further away from them and closer to something they'd never be able to take credit for. Travis, on the other hand, was easy to track. He lived online like it was his second job, posting pictures of his truck at every angle imaginable, flexing on gravel roads and in parking lots like he'd built the damn thing himself. He tagged places he wasn't supposed to be, shared stories about grind mode while sitting in lawn chairs with friends who looked equally aimless, and every now and then one of his posts would sneak its way into my feed, thanks to mutual friends I hadn't yet unfollowed. I'd stare at those pictures, not with jealousy, but with something closer to disbelief. How could they not see it? How could my parents look at his chaos and call it a plan, while looking at my structure and call it uncertainty? I heard from them a few times, mostly through group texts sent by my mom. Always cheerful on the surface, but hollow if you read between the lines. "Travis is thinking about buying equipment for his business," one text read, followed by a blurry picture of him holding a weed whacker like it was a trophy. "He's really motivated lately," she said, as if momentum was proof of direction. In those same messages, I might get a "hope school is going well," or "we're proud of you too," but it always felt tacked on, like an afterthought they threw in so they wouldn't feel guilty later. My dad rarely texted, and when he did, it was short. "Stay safe. Work hard. Never 'how are you?' Never 'do you need anything?'" At first I responded, kept it polite, sent pictures of my textbooks and study spaces and smiled when they sent thumbs-up emojis in return. But eventually, the small talk dried up, and I stopped trying to keep the thread alive. I started to see their messages the way I saw everything else from that life, as noise, background, static that used to mean something, but now just reminded me how alone I had always felt, even when I was home. One night, I sat with a friend from my economics class in the dorm lounge, and we were talking about families and future plans, sipping lukewarm tea while pretending we weren't both drowning in deadlines. And she asked me something that hit harder than it should have. She said, "Why do you still try with them?" And I didn't have an answer, not one that made sense. I shrugged and said, "Habit, I guess." But later that night, I stared at my phone screen, scrolling through texts I hadn't opened, wondering if maybe it wasn't habit at all. Maybe it was fear of finally accepting that they were never really rooting for me to begin with. The night before graduation, I sat alone on my bed, cap and gown laid out beside me, gold tassel draped across the collar, and I opened the family group chat for what I knew would be the last time. There were old pictures there, Travis's truck from the day he got it, a blurry birthday cake with my name misspelled, a picture of the dog I didn't even know they adopted after I left. I looked at the thread like a stranger peering through someone else's window, watching a family pretend to function, and then, without hesitation, I held my finger on the screen, selected Leave Conversation, and deleted the entire history. No more small talk, no more updates, no more pretending. I didn't need them to be proud of me anymore, because I was finally learning what it felt like to be proud of myself. And that feeling was louder than any silence they had ever given me. And tomorrow, I would walk across that stage, head held high, while they sat in the stands wondering if I had even shown up. There are certain moments in life that you imagine 1,000 times before they happen, not because you're particularly sentimental, but because those moments are milestones that you believe deep down will serve as proof to the world and maybe even to yourself that you made it, that you didn't just survive, but actually pushed forward through the mess and the hurt and the silence, and somehow came out on the other side with your dignity intact and your name still yours. My graduation was supposed to be one of those moments. I had envisioned it countless times over the years, not with any fairy tale lens, but with a kind of calculated simplicity. Walking across the stage, my name echoing through the auditorium, the flash of cameras, the feeling of eyes on me, not for being someone's daughter or someone's sister, but for something I'd built entirely on my own. And if I'm being honest, I used to picture my parents in that crowd, clapping with restrained pride, maybe even looking at each other as if realizing, finally too late, that they'd underestimated the wrong child. But that day came, and it looked nothing like the version in my head, because reality, as it turns out, has a sharper sense of justice than fantasy ever could. I woke up early that morning, not because I was nervous, but because the routine of discipline didn't leave my body easily. After 4 years of early shifts, late-night essays, and a schedule that had no space for drama or distraction, I ironed my gown until the creases were gone, pinned the honors cord exactly where it should be, and looked at myself in the mirror not with awe, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew they had done every hard thing the right way, even when no one was watching. There was no makeup, no celebratory breakfast, no selfies in the hallway, just silence, calm, and a strange pulse of anticipation that came not from excitement, but from the knowledge that today I would end something without anyone else's permission. The auditorium was massive, packed with families wearing cheap suits and dresses they'd only put on for this one occasion. Balloons, flowers, cheering sections, it all blurred into a wall of noise and color as I walked alone to my seat in the front row, reserved for those graduating with honors, our names etched in gold on our programs, our accomplishments laid out like proof that we were the ones who hadn't wasted a second of the last 4 years. My eyes scanned the crowd briefly, not out of hope but out of curiosity. I hadn't told them the time. I hadn't given them the address. I hadn't answered their last 3 messages, one of which simply said, "Are we still coming?" As if it was a casual brunch we were arranging, not the culmination of everything I had built without them. And still, they came. I spotted them just before the ceremony began. Standing near the back, scanning the rows like tourists looking for a landmark they'd never actually visited. My mom was holding her phone up, trying to call, her face tight with confusion. My dad looked agitated, probably because this wasn't how they'd expected things to go, probably because for the first time, they weren't in control of the narrative. I felt nothing, no anger, no joy, not even pity, just a cold, clear awareness that I had the power now, and they didn't even realize it. My phone buzzed once in my lap. A text from my mom. "Where are you? We're here." I turned the phone off and slipped it into the sleeve of my gown. The procession began, music swelling, voices rising, and I walked across that stage with a smile that came from somewhere deeper than pride. It was a smile born of defiance, of endurance, of finally arriving at a place I had carved out with my own hands, while they had stood on the sidelines assuming I was still the lost one. I shook the dean's hand, took my diploma folder, and glanced briefly at the crowd, not to find them, but to make sure I didn't. That moment, that exact second when I stood center stage under the hot lights, was mine and mine alone, and I wasn't going to give it away by making it about them. I exited the stage, walked past rows of strangers who cheered anyway, and kept walking. I didn't wait for the final prayer or the closing speech. I didn't wait for the photo op or the awkward post-ceremony hugs. I slipped out through the side door of the building and into the afternoon sun, the gown heavy on my shoulders, the wind catching the ends of the tassel as it dangled from my cap. I walked slowly, deliberately, every step away from that auditorium, a step away from the past I had finally outgrown. Behind me, somewhere in that sea of families, my parents were looking for me, not knowing that I had passed them, not realizing that they had already missed the moment they thought they'd come for. And I knew without turning around that they would be left sitting there with questions, clutching a program with my name printed in gold, wondering how they managed to raise a daughter who disappeared without a trace right in front of them. Because the truth was simple, I didn't vanish. I just stopped letting them see me. There's a weight to silence that most people underestimate, a kind of invisible pressure that settles over your chest and wraps around your ribs until even breathing feels like an act of defiance. That night, after the ceremony had ended and the lights in the auditorium dimmed, I found myself alone on a park bench just outside the student center, gown still bunched at my waist, diploma folder resting quietly on my lap, like a final piece in a long, slow-burning puzzle. I didn't go to the parties. I didn't answer the half-dozen classmates who texted to ask where I'd gone, why I hadn't stayed for the photos, or if I'd lost my phone. The truth was, I hadn't lost anything. I had simply chosen, with full clarity, not to share that moment with anyone who didn't earn the right to witness it. And the list of those people was shorter than I ever expected. Across town, in a hotel room I assume they booked without asking for my input, my parents were likely still checking their phones, still scrolling through group photos trying to spot a familiar face, still wondering how they had managed to lose their daughter in a building full of names and numbers and announcements made into microphones. Maybe they blamed the staff for poor directions, or the volunteers for not pointing them to the correct section. Maybe they thought I'd gotten held up, that I had dropped out at the last minute and was too ashamed to tell them. What they didn't realize, and what they never would unless they finally learned how to listen to something other than their own self-assured voices, was that I had been planning this moment longer than I'd been planning the graduation itself. It wasn't an accident that they didn't see me walk. It wasn't some cruel twist of fate that kept them from snapping that proud parent photo. It was me. It was all me, every step of this quiet rebellion carved out of years of sitting through birthday parties that felt more like obligations than celebrations. Years of listening to Travis get praised for taking the garbage out once while my scholarships and achievements were treated like minor footnotes in conversations about how different kids have different strengths. It was years of pretending that their mediocrity wrapped in favoritism was love, and that my independence was rebellion instead of survival. And that night, in the quiet hum of post-celebration stillness, I let the weight of all that hit me, not in tears, not in rage, but in relief so sharp it almost felt like grief. The next morning, I woke up to 18 missed calls, 5 voicemails, and 2 text messages from my mom. One short and panicked, asking where I was, and the other long and guilt-ridden, full of carefully chosen phrases that sounded rehearsed even in written form. "We were so proud to see your name," she wrote, as if that had somehow fulfilled their role. "We looked everywhere for you," she said, turning the blame outward, suggesting that I had been hiding instead of finally choosing to stop performing. "Travis was the one who said you'd probably pull something like this," she added, and that line, that single sentence, was the one that made me laugh. Not out loud, but deep in my chest, where the echoes of hurt had started to calcify into something stronger, something untouchable. Because of course Travis said that. Of course he framed my silence as drama, my boundary as manipulation. He was always the one who could fail upward and still be handed more. I didn't reply. Not to that message, not to the voicemails, not to the flurry of follow-ups that trickled in over the next few days as they tried to piece together a narrative that would allow them to remain the victims in a story where they had always been the authors. Instead, I took the gown to the dry cleaner, framed the diploma in the cheapest frame I could find because it wasn't the frame that mattered, and booked a one-way ticket to a city where no one knew my last name or who I was supposed to be related to. Travis posted a picture the next day, me in my cap and gown, cropped from someone else's group photo, probably pulled from a public page, or tagged by a mutual friend. The caption read, "Proud of my sis today," with a string of hashtags so empty they felt like insults. He hadn't been there, not really. He hadn't sat through the ceremony or waited by the doors or even known where to find me. But he posted the picture anyway because perception was everything to people like him. People who confuse presence with proximity, who think a snapshot means you were part of the story, even if you only watched it unfold through someone else's lens. My phone stayed off for 3 days after that, and when I finally turned it on, the noise came back instantly. Notifications, messages, more pictures, more passive-aggressive attempts at guilt disguised as concern. But it was all too late. They had missed it. Not just the walk or the ceremony, but the years leading up to it. The effort, the grit, the quiet suffering that they never asked about because they were too busy managing Travis's latest meltdown or defending his newest failure. They had missed every sign I had given them, every time I had needed something, and swallowed the request because I already knew the answer. The truth is, their chairs were empty long before graduation. They had been empty at every awards banquet I sat through alone, every parent-teacher meeting I walked myself to, every late-night essay I finished with a blanket over my shoulders because the heat in my room never worked right, and I didn't want to bother them. Their absence wasn't new, it was just for the first time intentional. And now, the silence was mine to give. It's funny how people talk about closure like it's something that can be wrapped in tissue paper, boxed up neatly, and handed over with a few carefully chosen words and a look of rehearsed regret, as if the weight of years could be compressed into a single conversation and then somehow, magically, forgotten. The thing they never tell you about closure is that sometimes it doesn't come with a face-to-face apology or a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it's quieter, heavier, lonelier than you expect. It's the absence of a response, the power of a door you refuse to open, the choice to live your life so far beyond someone's reach that even if they screamed your name in a room full of mirrors, they'd only ever hear their own voice echoing back. After graduation, I didn't rush to begin some picture-perfect adult life full of curated milestones and professional headshots framed on mahogany desks. What I did was simpler, and, in its own way, more radical. I lived without them. I got a job that paid enough, not great, not glamorous, but honest and steady. I rented a small studio apartment with creaky floors and terrible lighting, but a window that caught the sun just right in the morning, and every time I woke up to that light stretching across my bed, I felt a kind of peace that no apology could have ever bought. It wasn't freedom in the flashy sense of the word, not champagne popping or rooftop party kind of freedom, but the freedom of choosing what to carry and what to leave behind. The email came a week later, titled with all the urgency of guilt masquerading as concern. "We need to talk." It was long, almost desperate, laced with passive aggression and veiled attempts at rewriting history. My mother's voice came through in every line, even through the keyboard, her polished phrasing, her emotionally weaponized sentences, her ability to sound both hurt and blameless in the same breath. She wrote things like, "We only ever wanted what was best for you," as if denying me support while funding Travis's parade of bad decisions had somehow been an act of wisdom. She said, "We didn't know you felt that way," which to me was the worst part, because how could they not? What kind of parent doesn't notice the child who stopped asking for anything? The one who quietly disappeared from dinner conversations? The one whose victories became uncomfortable background noise in a household built to celebrate someone else's mediocrity? She mentioned Travis too, of course. "He's struggling right now and we're worried," she wrote, almost like it was an excuse, a way of softening their betrayal by reminding me of how complicated things had been. But I didn't care. I didn't care about his truck payments or his failed landscaping dream, or the fact that he was probably blaming me for the tension in the house now, spinning some story about how I'd ghosted the family for no good reason. They had always treated him like he was made of glass, like every bad decision deserved a second chance, and every mess he made was someone else's responsibility to clean. And I had cleaned enough. I didn't respond to the email. I read it twice, maybe 3 times, not because I was considering replying, but because I wanted to fully understand the limits of their understanding. I wanted to measure how far they were from ever truly seeing me. Then I printed my diploma, not the original, just a copy, and I mailed it to them in a plain manila envelope, no return address, no note, just the certificate, clean and undeniable. The one thing they couldn't claim, couldn't distort, couldn't post on Facebook like they'd been part of the journey. Let them hang it on the wall if they wanted. Let them stare at it during dinner and wonder why it felt so cold, so distant, like an artifact from a life they were never invited into. Years passed, not in a blur, but in deliberate, steady motion. I built my life one decision at a time. Never fast, never flashy, but always forward. I kept my circle small, filled it with people who saw me, really saw me, not as an extension of someone else's narrative, but as a whole person, complex and imperfect and real. I never moved back, never visited, never sent holiday cards or birthday messages. I stopped checking their social media accounts, stopped asking mutual friends for updates, stopped wondering what they thought of me, because by then, it no longer mattered. The version of me that needed their approval, their validation, their presence, it died the moment they chose to co-sign a truck instead of a future. One afternoon, long after the seasons had started to blend into each other, after the years had lost the sharpness of early grief, I got a missed call. The name lit up on the screen like a ghost. Mom, home. For a moment, I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen, not with hesitation, but with calculation. The past doesn't just vanish. It lingers in numbers and names and voices that once meant shelter, but I let it ring. I didn't decline it. I didn't block the number. I simply let it pass into silence, the same way I had let them go, without fanfare, without drama, without the need to prove anything anymore. They may still be searching for me in their memories, in their inboxes, in whatever version of the story they tell themselves to sleep at night. But I'm not hiding. I never was. I just stopped showing up for a family that never truly showed up for me. And the truth is, some goodbyes don't need to be spoken to be final. Some doors, once closed, never need to be opened again. And if they ever ask why I didn't turn around that day at graduation, I hope someone has the courage to tell them. Because she already knew exactly what was behind her, and she chose not to go back.